3D printing binoculars and analog skies, Robert Asumendi on episode 321 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anyone else who likes going out under the stars. Robert Asumendi grew up under the dark skies of rural Illinois, where his passion for the night sky was ignited. Like many of us, he moved to areas less favorable for astronomy in order to pursue education and employment as a graphic designer and web user interface designer. Eventually, he found himself in Western Oregon, a hotbed for amateur telescope building, accessible dark skies, and where one evening he had a peek through a friend's self-built 200mm binoculars, which channeled his interest to explore 3D printing of binoculars, and through analog sky, he has fused his creative side with a love for astronomy. So welcome to the show, Robert. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We should do a quick shout out. We were mentioning Tom Otvas, who connected us with Robert, and Tom's been a great supporter of the podcast, and certainly appreciate him connecting us with Robert, and some of the other behind the scenes support that Tom gives us. Really appreciate that, Tom. Thanks so much. So we're excited to talk about 3D printing binoculars. Robert, as we came on and we're having our pre-show chat, I was showing you that, well, Shane has his somewhere behind him, I'm sure, in the massive shelf of equipment that he has. But I was showing you my little pair of sort of constellation view binoculars that Shane and I 3D printed. So, it's something we've already kind of explored on our own over here at the Actual Astronomy Podcast. So we're excited to hear about your larger 3D printed binoculars today.
Yeah, well, you guys are already off to a great start. I mean, start on one end and then just move toward the other end, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited too. As you probably know, I've been getting into just bino viewing in general with a singular telescope, but I certainly recognize the advantage of a true binocular where you have two optical paths going one into each eye. So this is awesome. I'm excited for this conversation. Quick side note is our listeners can't see this, but Chris has a M51 background for his Zoom image, and it's somehow become three-dimensional, and it's wrapping around his head. I don't know. Anyway, I love it.
We're binocular fans. I was going to say we're big binocular fans, but we like all sizes of binoculars. I've got 7x35s, 20x60s, 10x50s, 7x50s, 10x70s, 22x100s, custom parallelogram mounts. Shane, you've got a variety of different binoculars. What do you have in your shelf before we hop in, just so people know where we're coming from?
You're certainly the more of the binocular astronomer than myself, but the ones that I use the most are the 12x36 Canon image stabilized, the little 3D printed binos that we made. That's kind of it. I've got a few others that really don't come off the shelf. My main use case here would be the bino viewer that I've been using pretty much exclusively for the last 12 or 18 months now.
So, Robert, how did you first get interested in astronomy, just like in general, before we start the binocular journey?
Well, like you said, I come from rural Illinois, so it's we have some pretty dark skies out there for being east of the Rockies in the United States. The sky was over my head every night, and then as a little kid, as a super little kid even, I was just kind of interested in what is this universe we're in? How does it work? What's all that stuff up there? It's just a topic of interest for me in both directions, both from an astronomy standpoint and also just being outdoors a lot as a young kid and enjoying the sky at night for its own beauty.
Did your family help to cultivate your interest as a small child?
Yeah, for sure. And, at some point I ended up with a smallish refractor, the classic, 1980s tripod. That was a telescope that was probably at least as long as me, certainly taller than me. And so it was a little challenging to use at times, but it did give me my first glimpses of the night sky as a little kid.
Did you start with a telescope then, or did you hop straight to binoculars?
As a kid, I know my parents had a pair of binoculars that had a little green picture of a cat that I think denoted the night worthiness of these. I can't remember if they were, like 7x35s or if they were like 7x50s or something like that. But there were cat eye certified binoculars somewhere in the house, but I never really used those. They're heavy, we're talking about 1970s technology. So they're probably cast metal of some sort, way too heavy for a kid to hold up.
Yeah. How about you, Shane? Shane, did you get going with binoculars or straight into a telescope?
It was straight into a telescope. The funny thing is I remember my parents had a pair of binoculars. I think they were 10 by 50s. When I was a kid, I just never really thought of using them to look up at the night sky. I always just thought, you needed a telescope for that kind of stuff. And as such, I never took them out. Fast forward, I think I was in my early 20s when I got my 8-inch Skywatcher, started with that. And then as I read more about, getting into astronomy proper, everybody recommended binoculars. Probably the biggest influence at that point in my astronomy journey was the Backyard Astronomer's Guide by Terence Dickinson and Alan Dyer. In there, they recommended, I think it was Bosch and Lomb Legacy binoculars. So I ended up purchasing those. I think they were 7 by 50s and started to use those more, and then really began to understand the value of binoculars and how they can do so many things that a telescope can't do, and really opened my awareness.
Yeah. For me, my girlfriend at the time, when I was in my late teens, she bought me a pair of binoculars, knowing that I had this burning passion to learn astronomy. And I had no idea that you could use binoculars for astronomy. So I always refer to it as the most disappointing Christmas gift I ever received. It turned out pretty good. I got to learn the night sky using those binoculars. I didn't have the money to buy a telescope at the time. So that's really how I began learning the nighttime sky and really understanding, the value of having two eyes on the universe. And I think where my disappointment stemmed from is I always loved binoculars. My folks didn't have them in the house, but my best friend's family had them in their house on their windowsill, and my grandparents all did. And I remember going out, and I was very familiar with using binoculars and looking at terrestrial things, or going out on the ocean with binoculars, but I never thought of looking at the night sky with binoculars. So I just assumed that they wouldn't be any good at looking at the night sky because I had never even thought of doing this. But when you use binoculars on the sky, they are fantastic. So Robert, what were the first really good binoculars that you used on the night sky to really begin to explore it?
Really good. That's a loaded question. I own
from a guy sitting around a bunch of binoculars he made himself.
I own way less binoculars than you. Really, what happened was, fast forward several years from being a little kid out in the country, the universe conspired to bring me back outdoors under a night sky in Montana on a family vacation. I was feeling like I definitely needed to connect back up with the universe a little bit. And I said, you know what? I wonder what it would look like if I just went down to the outdoor shop and grabbed some binoculars. And so, I grabbed some like Nikon's 10 by 50s or whatever, and had a couple of nice nights there in Montana. Ended up coming back home to the Willamette Valley of Oregon here, where we have the Eugene Astronomical Society, which is a pretty active little club. So that's where, I was able to check out a telescope from the lending library, and then meet everybody who's rolling their own telescopes and binoculars. And so that's, I would say the very first, really good pair of binoculars I looked through was those Frank's pair of 200 millimeter binoculars.
Tell us a little bit about where Analog Sky comes from and how you got into 3D printing binoculars. Because there's I know just even from the small little handheld constellation view type binoculars Shane and I cobbled together, there's a lot that goes into making that leap from buying a pair of off-the-shelf binoculars to even printing some very modest binoculars like we did to sort of the crazy advanced setups like you've got sitting on it basically looks like you've got a PC tower there, with optical components in it.
Well, these might look like, something strange right now. This I just took the case off so you can see inside, but I thought it'd be fun to give you a little visual tour inside for, our podcast audience listening at home. But it helped to talk about it a little bit. But anyhow, before we get too deep into like what makes this pair of binoculars good or that pair of binoculars good, I feel like there are two pieces of information that get left out of
Sure.
Like 99% of people either don't know these two pieces of information or really haven't thought through the consequences of those two pieces of information. So, number one is that the brightest view you ever have of the objects in the night sky is naked eye under a dark sky with both your eyes fully dark adapted.
Yep.
So, when you see the Veil Nebula through like a 40-inch telescope, you're seeing it dimmer than you see it at naked eye 1x. It's just a whole lot bigger, so it's easier for to see. And that's just how optics works. I'm not like an optician. I don't understand the physics of it, but this is the thing, is that when you're fully dark adapted with both of your eyes open, that's the most signal you can get out of the night sky for visual use, right?
Right.
That makes you start thinking a little bit differently. If you really think about that, that makes you start thinking differently about how to build your telescope and what it is we're doing out there. And it certainly leads into the second point, which is that the optical system doesn't stop at the eyepiece. And it doesn't actually even stop at your retina, where those photons get turned into electrochemical signals, because what's making the image is your brain. The image actually exists on some kind of, metaphysical plane that would, does it even exist in space somewhere? We don't really understand what that image is very well yet, but we do know that your brain does a whole lot of processing to create what we see. It does things like, when you have both your eyes open, it does things like combine the sharpest parts of both image into one image. It does noise reduction. The view is brighter. And you can test that. You don't even need binoculars or a telescope or anything. Just go outside in the dark and close one eye, and a lot of the stars go away.
Mm-hmm.
Or, even look at the trees around you, the silhouetted trees, and it goes from kind of sharp, like you can kind of make out those trees, close one eye, and all of a sudden they're blurry and they're much lower contrast. And it's like, oh wait, I didn't even need a telescope really to discover some of these aspects of how vision works at night, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are off-the-shelf binoculars that you can buy for sure. The handheld ones are all kind of geared toward daytime use for the most part. There are very few that are even like optically are giving you a big exit pupil. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is, how do you make binoculars better for using them under a night sky? We start looking at that. Like I said, I started looking through a pair of 200 millimeter binoculars, which is 8 inches, that a friend built. And of course, here in Oregon, like that's a very small telescope. Out here on the West Coast, everyone here personally met John Dobson back in the day and was really inspired to build these giant telescopes. So, you take out your 10 or 12 inch when you're too like lazy or tired to bring out your 20 inch around here. So, so even 8-inch binoculars is kind of, it's a smaller aperture instrument, but just one look through those binoculars, I said, wow, this is comfortable. And I can just stare at it for like minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to figure, like, how could I get a hold of this thing from Frank? I decided, it wouldn't be nice to roll him down the hill and take it from him. So I had to build my own, right? I'm a millennial. I don't have a bunch of power tools in my shed or garage. At this point, I don't even own my own garage. And I felt like a lot of people are in that boat these days of the halcyon days of telescope building in the 20th century, where it was a bunch of woodworking guys in their shops, in their garages and stuff. And I'm just a graphic designer and a computer nerd sitting at my desk. So what technology can I bring to bear to do this thing that Frank did with wood? Because he's a brilliant mechanic and woodworker. What can I do sitting here at my desk after my kids go to bed to produce something similar? And so that's where I started looking. That is a very long-winded answer as to how I started looking into 3D printing. And not just 3D printing, you can see here, I'm saying this on a podcast. To my right, there is a completely 3D printed, completely plastic pair of 50 millimeter binoculars called Magic. To my left, there is a pair of 80 millimeter binoculars called Hart. These have an aluminum chassis with a lot of 3D printed parts to make them work. So,
and it looks like Magic looks like, what's the size there? It looks like it's like about an 8x8 cube with two very large 2-inch eyepieces housed at the top. Is that about the size of it?
It is much smaller than that. It's actually 6 by 6
by 6,
5.5 or so.
Okay.
So that is it. And yeah, so these 2-inch eyepieces do stick out pretty far from the top, but you can put something smaller if you want.
I would use 2-inch eyepieces because this is something Shane and I have spent no small amount of time talking about, debating at times, because we've enjoyed the binocular observing so much, me with my sort of more traditional binoculars and Shane with his binoviewers on his telescopes. And then we've talked about maybe trying to cobble together some wide field 50 millimeter ish binoculars, because a couple of years back, Shane made me and made himself 50 millimeter sort of like super finder scopes, maybe, if you will, or very small 50 millimeter achromatic f5 telescopes, which we can use 2-inch eyepieces in to get pretty much like 10, almost 11 degree true field of view, which is a spectacular little instrument. And then with our love for bino viewing and binocular viewing, we're like, we should figure out a way to make this into a binocular telescope. But there's some limitations in doing that, which it seems like you've overcome. A couple of things we ran into are just sourcing all the little parts to get the tubes to line up, making sure that you can actually focus, because you don't have a lot of focus range in these small focal length instruments, and then making sure that you can actually adjust the eyepieces so that they line up with each of your pupils in your eyes. There's a few challenges there. Robert, how did you design these to overcome the challenge of the small focal length of binocular optics?
Well, CAD software helps a lot with that. If you're 3D printing is pretty accurate. It's to within about, a 0.1 of a millimeter is about how accurate you can get a 3D print to print on a standard machine. So it's pretty easy to create precise parts by 3D printing or laser cutting this aluminum. There are several things here that make those adjustments work, because that's one thing people always say, well, it's impossible to make your own binoculars because you can't make the two sides line up, and it's only a tiny exit pupil you're trying to line up. How do you do that? One way to do that, and I'm turning around these binoculars to the back, and in the back here we have two knobs, 1, 2, and those are the mirrors inside. And by turning those knobs, you're able to adjust the vertical and horizontal merging of both of those sides.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that is for different eyepieces that aren't totally collimated to each other precisely, whether it is because your individual head works differently from your friend's individual head, and you need to align those a little differently, or whatever, even if it's a little jammed up inside, you can adjust for that just by having a couple of knobs for collimation. And that's something that makes binoculars worthy of the night sky, is being able to touch up the collimation easily with your hands, with no tools, in the dark. And then you can unlock those extra levels of, we can crank up the magnification, we can go really wide, we can put different eyepieces in it, we can have some fun.
So just the side view, can you just turn them to the side for a second? You've got, there's a couple things. You have looks like a large knob or a handlebar coming out the back. What is that? Is that a handlebar or?
Back here?
Yeah, that.
Okay. Yeah. So this is 1/4-20 threaded, just a small handle that we 3D print. This nice EVA foam around it. It's just a small slew handle. So there are a few different spots on here. There's one in the back, and then there's one on each side that are all 1/4-20. So they work with standard photographic equipment if you have a handle you really like. Okay. And so when you have this mounted on a tripod, you're able to slew it easily using these little handles.
Oh, okay.
I just want to go back for just a quick minute here, and I just really want to underscore for all of the listeners how important those collimation adjustments are for bino viewing. If you have binoculars that you're using in the daytime that are just slightly out of alignment, you probably won't really notice it. They'll work fine. You can look at birds or whatever and really enjoy the experience. But at night, if there is anything off in that optical path in terms of collimation or alignment, you really have problems. This is where you can't merge images. Singular stars appear as two, and you see doubles of everything, and it becomes extremely frustrating. And it's probably the number one reason why people, if they attempt bino viewing, don't like it, because they have problems merging the image, and there's usually a collimation issue. So the ability to adjust collimation on these 3D printed binos is incredible. I think that is really, well, a key aspect to making this a fine instrument.
In my large 22 by 100s, I always have to take a little screwdriver with me and tweak that optical alignment with the little screwdriver in the field when I'm setting them up. And that is just a royal pain.
I come from a user interface designing background, as you mentioned in my bio. I've built websites, the front end of websites for 20 years. Every day of that is thinking about, how are people going to use this? How can we make it easy? How can we make it better? It's kind of the mindset that I'm coming from. And so I kind of categorize when I'm designing my binoculars and just looking at telescopes and binoculars and stuff in general. Their features kind of fall into two categories for me. There's like rich guy features, and then there's game-changing features, right? And by rich guy features, I mean just sort of refinements for refinement's sake. And then there are things that really enable a whole new group of people to use an instrument, or for people to use an instrument in a different way. And that's why you can have, like, I'm sure everyone at Kowa is a great human being, and everyone who owns a pair of Kowa Highlander Promenars is also a great human being. But that's why you can buy a $6,000 pair of 80 millimeter binoculars that you can't touch up the collimation on yourself or go above 50x magnification, right? Because it's like that design process has gone a certain direction. It's like, wait a second, guys, this is supposed to be for stargazing. So we need some different features here. Being able to change your collimation in the field, touch that up, or merging, really we call it, is just making sure the two images line up to each other. That's what enables you to send a whole group of stargazers through this instrument at a star party, just one after the other, getting great views of the night sky.
I noticed when you uncovered the objectives, I was kind of surprised. Like, I thought we would see like the traditional two little circles of objective glass there, but you can't really see that very easily because there's these three panels that kind of almost looks like Wall-E in a way, if you remember Wall-E from the from sorry, I don't mean to make that a comparison off the cuff, but it has like a visor over top and then visors on either side. Is that for light baffling and for dew prevention, or is this just sort of a happy accident in the design?
It is not a happy accident. It is very it is very intentionally, number one, a lens cover for when you're not using it, because it flips down. And I'm not a careful person who sits there and puts the lens caps back on to all of my eyepieces or back on. I have no idea where any of the lens caps are for any pair of binoculars that I use. I just have a bucket that I put all of my eyepiece caps into when I find one. You got to turn all your weaknesses into strengths. So I designed this cover that is always stuck to the front of the binoculars. When it's down, it is covering up the lenses. When it's up, it's both a light shield and a little bit of a dew cover there. I intend this, especially this magic model, I intend this to be an urban stargazing tool. Being able to block out those street lights with something really is, for just printing a couple extra pieces of plastic, we're giving people a lot of that action of being able to block out all that pesky light pollution.
One of the things that I've played around with a bit is using filters with my binoculars, especially like my 35 mils. I can take a 2-inch filter and stick it over the front of the objective lens. That's really not the way that filters are designed. They're really designed to be placed between the objective or the prism and binocular case and the bottom of the eyepiece. That's really how they're intended to be used by the designers of those filters. With a binocular telescope, traditionally, you would be placing those filters, I think, typically onto the eyepieces, so that if you want to change out the filters, you have to remove the eyepieces and add them back in. Recently, I bought a filter slide for my telescope, and I was wondering, how do the filter slides work with these binoculars?
They work great. So I put 2-inch filters into these little 3D printed filter cartridges. They have little magnets on the bottom. They just go into holes in the sides of both of these models and use the same filter cartridge for both of them. The subsequent 200 millimeter that we'll probably get around to talking about here in a little bit. These filters work great here in Magic. 50 millimeter. People always talk about how with small aperture instruments you can't use filters, right?
Mm-hmm. Not true.
Hear that a lot.
Not true
it's
at all.
Not true. Because of that exit pupil thing. So, what people are saying is that I'm zooming in way too far with a small instrument. I'm using a 1 millimeter exit pupil or a 2 millimeter exit pupil, and I'm expecting a dark image to look better when I get rid of most of the light. Like, that's silly. But if we're recapturing that naked eye view that I talked about being the brightest view we can get, if we have a 7 millimeter exit pupil, a 6 millimeter, 5 millimeter, you pop these filters in and it's amazing. It's just like popping a filter into a 30-inch telescope.
Mm-hmm.
I love using just UHC because it just gives you a little extra without getting rid of all the stars. I've even, with this Magic 50 millimeter, from our urban site for our club, we do monthly star parties. I've even put O3s into this thing to take a look at nebulas like, M42 and the lagoon. It really cuts through the light pollution, and people can actually see that nebulosity. You can use any filter you want with these and get amazing views.
So what kind of power can you use with these? So it looks like right now you've got some large 2-inch eyepieces in here. Can you interchange 2-inch and 1 1/4-inch eyepieces, or do you have to sort of pick one or the other to stick with?
Yes, well, with 3D printing, I know it's kind of painful to buy 1 1/4 adapters or 2-inch adapters for your 1 1/4 eyepieces when they cost $30 a piece.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're 3D printing them for a whole lot less money, it makes sense to just adapt all of your 1 1/4 eyepieces with 2-inch focuser adapters and just leave them on. You can print as many of these you need for an 1 1/4 eyepiece, and they just use little grub screws to hold them onto the barrel. One of the reasons I got into 3D printing was like, you can't just go out and buy a 2-inch focuser that you can jam next to another 2-inch focuser, as I'm sure you guys have found trying to figure out your project. Is like there's not a commercial focuser out there where you can do that. So you have to design one. But 2-inch eyepieces really unlock those incredible wide views. This Magic here is it's f4 or like f3.7. Technically, it's a 51 by 182 millimeter focal length. These 26 millimeter 2-inch eyepieces from Symphony, they give you a 7x view with a 7 millimeter exit pupil, so it turns it into like a pair of 7 by 50s. And these are $60 a piece. Is what I love about these. If you're comparing it to like a 25 Plössl with a 50-degree field, or these 2-inch eyepieces with a 70-degree field, it's like, yeah, even if the edge is a little soft, it's like, it's an amazing view compared to that.
Yeah, because typically with binoculars, they're in like, I think it's like the f3 or 3.3 to f3.8-ish range. What is the focal ratio of the objectives that are used for these 50 millimeters?
Yeah, so these are just the standard lenses, and that's part of this concept. I guess we'll get into. I wanted to use the most widely available lens that you can get for a 50 millimeters. So that's a 182 millimeter focal length, a 51 millimeter diameter. So that comes out to about f3.7. This is the exact same lens that would come in a 7 by 50 that you bought, or a 10 by 50, or whatever by 50. It's just kind of, they put different eyepieces on the other end.
Tell people about how they go about getting a pair of these binoculars to put together if they want, because Analog Sky isn't like a traditional brick and mortar type of establishment. My understanding is that people, and you're going to correct me because I'm going to get some of this wrong, purchase the plans, and then there's sort of a community associated with those plans. And then what people do is they contact a 3D printing company to print out the parts, and they put it all together in their home, and they have to order the like the lenses and their eyepieces and that sort of stuff a little bit separately. Am I getting that right, Robert? Or Or can you correct me on what I've said, please?
Yeah, Chris, that sounds pretty good. So what I am offering to the world, a complete video course on how to build these. If you've ever gone online and looked at telescope building because you thought, oh, it'd be cool to build a telescope, but then you look at what directions are out there, and shout out to anyone who's ever put any information out there into the world about how to build a telescope. It's not a criticism, but it's like, it's not totally obvious to everybody, just say like, hey, you just take your saw and you measure this and you cut this, and then you take your other saw and then you drill this and then you glue this and clamp this, and you just do all this math. With a lot of maker projects out there, the weak link is the instructions on how to do it. So I said, look, I know that my 9-year-old daughter can put these together.
Mm-hmm.
I've designed it so it's super easy. All you need is a 3mm hex key, a 2mm hex key, some silicone, made it as simple as possible, and then created a video step-by-step instructional course on how to do that, showing literally my 9-year-old daughter and my wife, Tiffany, putting it together. There's no shenanigans behind the scenes. There's no sanding, drilling, gluing, or anything going on after the camera stops rolling. What you're seeing is them literally putting together this model that I have in front of me. What I've designed here is not only a new kind of binocular that has all of these really great stargazing features, but also just a new way to do amateur telescope building at home at your kitchen table without all these tools. And so you get the course, and we have made the course as easy as possible. So it's like live links to all the components that you need. So for the 3D printed parts, if you have a 3D printer, you can print them yourself. If you don't have a 3D printer, there are services you can go online, like Craft Cloud 3D is kind of a hub where all these different service providers can sign up, and you can just upload the files. I've made it real simple to upload the files because they're sort of on sprues, like with a model kit, how the parts are sort of stuck together.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to upload like 50 files. You have to upload like 7 or 8 files kind of thing. So that part's really easy. You just pick your service provider. For you guys up in Canada, I kind of checked around the Saskatoon area and did not find a provider, but I did find Americans who are willing to ship it to you for $10. So it's a pretty good deal to have it 3D printed. And then the rest of it, AliExpress is where these lenses come from, where my lenses come from. I put the absolute cheapest lenses and mirrors I can find into mine to see how that would look. Because part of, giving people this plan of how to DIY it is most people are going to look for the absolute cheapest thing that they can find, right? Which is a fine thing to do. So this has really been designed around what's the cheapest 50mm lens I can find, what's the cheapest 50mm diagonal mirror I can find, and how well does that work? And if I order like 40 of them, then do they all work the same? Anyhow, you get your parts online just through online shopping. You have the step-by-step video course, and it's a really exciting, fun project to do now. I would contrast it sharply with, I don't know if you guys have kids. I have 2 young kids, and I have had to sit through several STEM, quote unquote, STEM projects that were supposed to be for children to do, and I could barely do them and cut myself a bunch, and it's super there's so many projects out there that's like, oh, you can do this yourself. That's not true, man. So I wanted to put my money where my mouth was on this, so to speak, and so that was the genesis of saying, hey, you know what, I will actually sit down my daughter and we're going to film this together, and you're going to see that you can do this too.
There's kind of like 3 bits as I see it. So there's ordering of the plans and getting the plans, ordering of the 3D printed components once you have the plans, and then ordering of your optics. I understand this uses mirrors and not prisms. You have to get a couple objective lenses. You're going to need to get a couple eyepieces. Is that,
yes.
Do I sort of have that? Okay. All right.
Yeah, so we have a big bill of materials when you sign up for the course, and it's just like, it's all listed there. So you can just go through that list. You can go through that list as your budget allows without having to, spend a bunch of money on a telescope, on Klarna payments,
okay.
or whatever payments, right? We have some recommended eyepieces to get you started. Of course, you can spend as much money as you want on eyepieces and filters. And you could even spend more money if you want on the mirrors and the lenses if you want to do upgraded lenses. And there will be some recommendations on all of that.
How much are the plans and course? And then generally, how much does it cost to get printed, and how much will it cost to get somebody going with a basic set of optics?
This is Magic. The 50 millimeter, the 80 millimeter is Hart. Magic, the course costs is going to be like $49.95. So $50 US is what we're going to be asking for that, including that price of the course itself, getting all the components, getting them printed, getting a couple pairs of basic eyepieces, getting a tripod to put it on. We haven't talked about tripods yet, but if you get a basic video tripod, like the Orion Tritech 2 is my favorite because it's got a little geared column that works, and it's only $80. You can put an entire kit together for about $500.
That's awesome. And Robert, just as you mentioned, the mounting aspect, is this mounted just to like a standard camera tripod plate, and then just mount it to the ball head or like video head or whatever you might be using?
Yeah, video head is good because it's kind of locked in altitude and azimuth, like our telescope mounts are. They have that. They can have counterbalance and nice dampening feel. It's really a luxurious feel compared to, kind of the telescope mount world. And so it's actually pretty nice. And the nicest thing about it, aside from that, honestly, is that you can lock it down because they have little locks for the, both the altitude pointing it up and down and the azimuth pointing it, around and around. The way that I have come to use these on a video head is when I'm moving them, and when I'm locking them down, I'm locking them down. And then if we're changing eyepieces, they don't move on you regardless of balance issues with heavy eyepieces. So if you wanted to put 22 Naglers in there, you could put 22 Naglers in there, even though they weigh like 3 pounds for a pair of them, which is more than this whole thing weighs.
How much does it weigh?
So with a basic pair of eyepieces, Magic weighs about 3 pounds. Hart, the 80 millimeter f5, weighs under 10 pounds with a pair of eyepieces. So
could I mount these on my parallelogram mount that can hold 4-pound binoculars, say, maybe even 5 pounds, I guess? It has a 1 1/4 inch. It has like a little plate. Is there like a 1 1/4 thread on the bottom? Can I screw my plate onto that and put them on my parallelogram mount? Would that work?
You could. I mean, I guess that's an interesting question. I haven't tried using it with the parallelogram mount. I find the compactness of a tripod with a video head really, really nice and easy to use. And of course, these both have a 90-degree angle in them. So on Magic, there's one mounting spot on the bottom. On Hart, there is the mounting spot on the bottom, but I have duplicated all of the mounting spots on this side aluminum wall as well. I have not tried that yet, full disclosure, but it's basically the exact same thing. And so I would guess that if you had like a T type Altaz mount, you could do that also.
Cool.
So this is an adventure to go on together. One of the cool things about 3D printing is that we can change the parts too. So when you sign up for the course, you get a lifetime access to the course, and maybe we will come up with a little bit better focusers. Maybe we'll come up with different ways to do different parts. And when we come up with that through user feedback, you can just print new ones and put those in. Who knows how people will be mounting these, and it will be exciting to find out.
Yeah, this is awesome. I love the usage of 3D printing, to make this more accessible, but to really sort of change the whole experience in terms of, life cycle of ownership. And like you mentioned, sort of upgrades or modifications that, who knows, maybe there's none, but maybe there is some that are developed in the future. And I think this is just a super neat way to get into the hobby, or to augment some gear that you don't have, or improve what you're using in terms of binoculars.
Yeah, and real quick, I know you guys love your very sharp Takahashi and Borg refractors. You used to ultra crisp displays. One thing you could do with this little Magic, rather than putting the 50 millimeters in, like you could put in some, these are f3.7, you could put in some like 44 f5s I've seen out there. And so, you get a sharper edge. You could put your 32 Masuyama into there get a friend for it
Yeah.
at f5, and then and then you'd be looking at like 18-degree fields or something like that.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That would be wild. That would be wild. I like this idea. I think this is the way to do binoculars for once you get beyond like the regular handheld ones. The challenge that Shane and I initially had, we'd talked about making our constellation view binoculars for a while. The way ours came about is a friend of mine, Randall, he sent us pictures and instruction sets that he had modified. So he found a set that he liked. He did the 3D printing. Then he made some corrections and sent those to us. If we didn't get the augmented instruction sheet, like you said, it's difficult because every place is a little bit different. Every person is a little bit different. We'll have access to different tools and techniques. So we had to kind of get a processed version of the 3D printed constellation view binoculars in order to make them up. So that took a while just to get that. And then we had to sort of just go through the regular process of getting the other parts and building them, which was actually almost easier than getting that initial, well, how the heck do we even make these in the first place, which was the big hump to get over. So you're kind of taking people over that hump and then giving them the tools and the techniques they need to put them together. I think it's a really interesting model and probably a great way to do it, even though it's very different from purchasing anything else that people are going to get.
Yeah, I mean, it's an adventure. It's fun to do. Like, how many hours are you planning to spend outdoors, like actually using them? Like this magic right here, it takes about 3 hours to build. So like one observing session, and you built these and spent less than you would spend on one ethos eyepiece. And it's like, in these, we haven't even talked about what you can see through these things, but at 7mm exit pupil, like, you're seeing the Heart and Soul Nebula together with the double cluster, the stock one, the Muscle Man, like that whole scene as a scene. You're seeing both of those with these 50mm binoculars. That O3 arc next to M31, you can see that with either of these.
Wow.
With O3 filters, you can see the whole North American Nebula together with the Pelican, and they stand out like the lagoon practically.
Things I could imagine looking at that I've used my little 50mm singular monocular for, which makes these exciting, is I found that seeing, for example, Barnard's Loop is just the easiest thing to see in a 50mm binocular with an H-beta filter. And I could imagine that a set of these would really make short work of it. Probably you'd have no trouble seeing it at all, even without the filter in there. I would imagine just the boost alone would be fantastic. I think people may not be aware of the boost that you get. There's a couple things that stand out with these binoculars. One, which is they're angled, they're 90-degree binoculars, so you're not having to sort of tilt your whole head up and move around in awkward ways. And that they're mounted, so you're going to be able to look into them for a long time. The ability to use the 2-inch eyepieces and the filters, though, for me anyway, as maybe a more advanced amateur, is that's the game changer, where you can put those big 2-inch eyepieces in and the filters in and get the massive field of view and to really see some truly huge objects in the night sky.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I'll add to that, Chris, is just the noise kind of reduction and how using two eyes produces a better image. The other thing it does is it increases the image scale somehow. And, as opposed to mono viewing, if anybody is kind of questioning this or really wanting to understand what the effect of two eyes is versus one eye, just take your binoculars out and close one eye with them and use them, and then open the other eye and just see what the difference is like, because it's really quite astounding when you use two eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's, what's even more important, just from that comfort level, I like to do this exercise with people where I just say, close one eye right now and wait 10 seconds. And already after 10 seconds, you start to feel the muscles in the corner of your eyes start twitching, right? Yep. Like you can feel it's uncomfortable. The next time you're out with friends, watch how long they actually look through the eyepiece at a time in their telescope. Whereas with this, you can stare through it all night, continuously, as long as you got your favorite eyepieces in there. What that really changes the experience from I'm a guy who knows about astronomy, who's looking for a particular thing, and I'm going to go find it, and then I'm going to peek at it, and maybe I'm going to change eyepieces or put in a filter. 2, I'm someone who knows nothing about astronomy. I just think the sky's pretty. I want to be a human being enjoying my night sky. I'm just going to point these anywhere, and I'm going to explore around, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be the best 10 minutes of my day.
You've also got some larger ones. I think initially you had begun with the large binoculars. That's where analog sky really got its beginnings. Robert, do you want to tell us a little bit about those first?
Yeah, so like I said, I looked through my friend's 8-inch and I like that. So I was like, all right, I'll build those too. And so I started at that end. And then I realized I had, well, if I can get the 3D printed parts and the laser cut stuff for me, then let's share the wealth, and other people could build these too with just a screwdriver. So I did that, realized that the 200 was going to cost people a lot of money for me to build for them, and set up kind of a micro manufacturing thing. And so I came up with a 6-inch that would be significantly cheaper just because it's so much lighter, and you wouldn't need like a $3,000 Burlap tripod to put it on, right? I thought, all right, we'll do the crowdfunding thing. What's the year 2019? But built the mailing list, put it all together, shot the video, and launched the crowdfunding campaign the first week of March 2020, when the entire United States at least closed down for COVID.
Yeah.
So I raised $100,000 in the first 2 days, and then sold one more unit after that. So things got put on hold, and of course all the parabolic mirrors disappeared. So it's like, all right, what are we going to do? My buddy Frank, again, the same Frank who built the 200, he built himself some 80s because he was able to just get those 80 millimeter F5s from Surplus Shed. And the view through those blew me away again. This business mostly is about me stealing Frank's ideas and trying to make money off of them.
Thanks, Frank.
Shout out, Frank. No, so anyhow, but I do get people asking me, okay, when do the big ones come back? Now that I put it out there in the world that I'm doing these lens ones, when do the big ones come back? And I am revamping those because the mirrors are like twice as expensive now.
Yeah.
To get, they're starting to come back, but it's just going to be an 8-inch, but you build it yourself, and it's going to be a travel job. So that little telescope in a box concept, it's going to be able to fit in your carry-on on an airline, 200 millimeter binoculars, and it's going to fit under, hopefully, it's going to fit under the 15-pound or 7-kilogram weight limit that countries like New Zealand and the Southern Hemisphere give you for your carry-on. Coming back, first prototype this summer at Oregon Star Party. Everybody come to Oregon Star Party. And then the course will be available next year.
And when's the course available? Because I think you were saying you're working away on the course for the 50 millimeter are called the Magic. The 80 millimeters are called the Heart. When do these courses become available, or are you still working on them?
Yeah, so we just wrapped shooting on the Magic 50 millimeter a few days ago in terms of the instructions. So if it hasn't become clear yet, I am just one guy, and I have a day job. I didn't sell an apartment in San Francisco for $5 million. This is an entirely hand-to-mouth labor of love endeavor, because we all only have a certain amount of time in this universe to do something that we're really into.
We're there with you on that one.
It's going to get here when I'm done with it. I'm hoping that is within the next few weeks for Magic, and then Heart is going to come right after that.
How can people stay up to date and follow? You've got YouTube channels, you've got some other things. What's the best way? Is there a newsletter people can sign up for?
They can sign up for the newsletter. People who have been on the newsletter for a while will know that I really do not spam that at all. So sign up for the newsletter, and that when you actually get an email from me, it's for a good reason. And likewise with social media, we have all the social media accounts, Analog Sky at various places. Again, I make stuff. I'm not a poster. I wish I was better at being a poster. It takes time. It takes time away from actually doing the thing. So I'll be a much better poster once the thing is actually ready. And so just sign up on all those, subscribe, and you'll know when it's here.
I subscribe. We'll let people know on the show. Speaking of things, there's one more thing. This is going to be just like a Steve Jobs moment here. There's one more thing, isn't there, that you showed us at the very start, and this really got me interested. Tell me about that little thing you pulled out at the start of the show.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I got handhelds too. So I find handheld binoculars really uncomfortable to use for any length of time, because they're heavy and awkward and they're too much magnification. But these handhelds, I was like, if I was making a handheld, what would I make? So they're 3.5 by 24s, which is a really unique view of the sky, I gotta say. I mean, 5x is an incredibly unique view of the sky. 3.5 is you haven't seen it before, if you haven't seen it before. And they got filters. It's going to have a laser, just like these other ones have a laser. And we're going to jam a bunch of electronics into it so that it is a useful tool for you out in the field, like has an SQM meter, has a laser for pointing things out to your friends with that little extra bit of magnification to help you pick out, Uranus or whatever. So super useful tool in the field and fun view that you can't get from like a manufacturer, right?
What's the true field of view on the 3.5 by 24s?
A lot. Right now I just have some 25 millimeter Plossels in here. So what I want to do, I mean, these are going to be a little ways off, but what I want to do is sit down with someone like Harry Siebert or someone who's really good at designing eyepieces and come up with, can we cram 65 degree field into this, or can we cram a 70 degree field even, and get that exit pupil up with a big field and just
that would be like
go nuts with it.
That'd be pretty good, because I think with our constellation views, which Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, I think ours are like 2x, if that, maybe just under.
Yeah, I think they're 2x. Yeah.
Anyway, something like 2x, and we end up getting about an effective aperture of, I don't know, like around 20 or 25 millimeters. So this gets a little bit more power and sounds like maybe a little bit larger field of view, even if you can get 65 degrees out of them. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Interchangeable eyepieces too. So you can change, you can go up to 5x maybe.
Wow.
Something like that. There's a book from the late 19th century. I can't remember the author's name, but it's about using opera glasses to look at the night sky.
Service.
And, he talks about, Service. That's his book. So, at the beginning, he says, go to the pawn shop, get the opera glasses that are like 4x, I think, 3 or 4x. He says, don't get the surplus Navy binoculars because they're 6x or 7x. And that's just way too much magnification. That's not how the sky is meant to be seen. It's too much. So there is a historical concept of like, of this kind of view of the sky. So I thought, hey, I should knock that together and see what that actually looks like. There will be a 60-inch too. I mean, yeah. On the other end, there's going to be a 60-inch for any, not billionaires, but if there are any millionaires listening and you're cool, you're all right to talk to, hit me up, and there will be 60-inch binoculars if you want to build them. Yeah, it's true. We didn't even really look at heart, but if you're really into your optical quality, like that's f5. Those lenses are incredible. I have an optician buddy tested those, and the lenses. I just want to shove that into the conversation here, since we're mostly focused on magic. But these 80 f5s that go into the short tube 80s look really, 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 really good at these lower magnifications. So if you are an image quality nut, then that might be the one.
Great meeting you, Robert. This is amazing. Wish you all the best. And I'm excited to see these kind of live in the world and, other people using them. I think this is an amazing concept, and I'm glad you're doing it. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. I really appreciate being able to have a conversation about this with some enthusiasts, especially people who really love those wide views of the sky. And it's great to be able to share this love of this kind of view.
Thanks so much, Robert. Really appreciate it. It was really a lot of fun. I am a huge binocular fan and looking forward to maybe some of these in the future once I get some of my other projects that are currently underway done. You can follow Robert and the 3D printed binocular revolution at analogsky.co. And dear listeners, please subscribe to us do us that favor and share it with the stargazers that you know. We certainly would appreciate it. You can always reach us at actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.